Hello friends, let me talk to you today about the essay titled The Character of the Man in Black, written by Oliver Goldsmith. Oliver Goldsmith is an Anglo-Irish poet. He is an essayist, he is a novelist, he is a playwright. He has successfully tried his hands at almost all genres of writing. And he is a contemporary of Dr. Johnson. He is also considered to be one among the transition writers, the writers who combined the writing styles of both the neoclassical and the romantic school. And he is known for his poem, The Deserted Village. Same way, he is very famous for his novel, The Vicar of Wakefield. He has written a very famous play titled She Stoops to Conquer. He has written an entertaining series of essays, and one collection of essays is titled The Citizen of the World, and The Character of the Man in Black is an essay taken from this particular collection. So he was such a brilliant writer that Dr. Johnson said something very interesting about him. I'll just read it to you. Dr. Johnson said about Oliver Goldsmith that he was one who left scarcely any kind of writing untouched, and who touched nothing that he did not adorn. So such was his creative talent and his ability to write, that he worked magic on everything that he touched, as Dr. Johnson said. At the same time, this man, though he was a brilliant writer, his character, people had a kind of varied opinions about his character. He was supposed to be a very short and almost an ugly man with all kind of marks on his face, and but he was a very large-hearted person, very, very generous, very loving. At the same time, he sometimes could be very egoistical. He would be jealous when somebody else achieves something, and he used to be so immensely funny, humorous. He used to be very, very clumsy. He was a master when he had his pen in his hand, but other times he couldn't even speak properly on some occasions. So he was a kind of a mixed character. And that is why Dr. Johnson again has said something about this Oliver Goldsmith's character, a very entertaining observation. This is what Dr. Johnson said about Oliver Goldsmith, the man. No man was more foolish when he had not a pen in his hand, or more wise when he had. No man was more foolish when he had not a pen in his hand, or more wise when he had. So it was a kind of a puzzle, how a man could be brilliant at some certain occasions or in some fields, and so utterly stupid at some others. So that was this character called Oliver Goldsmith. Now this particular essay, which is often prescribed for study in BA and MA English courses, is taken from this essay titled The Character of the Man in Black. In some books you just find it as The Man in Black. This is taken from the collection of essays titled The Citizen of the World. Now this is about a man who always dressed in black. And who was this man in black? The name is not revealed anywhere, but Oliver Goldsmith says that he modeled this man on his own father. His father was a clergyman, and so Goldsmith said that his father was an inspiration for this character, but the people who knew Oliver Goldsmith believe that there is a lot of the author himself in this character called the Man in Black. In this particular essay we have here tells us about this character who is called the Man in Black. So let me just start reading. Though fond of many acquaintances, I desire an intimacy only with a few. The man in black whom I have often mentioned is one whose friendship I could wish to acquire, because he possesses my esteem. His manners, it is true, are tinctured with some strange inconsistencies, and he may be justly termed a humorist in a nation of humorists. Though he is generous even to a profusion, he affects to be thought a prodigy of parsimony and prudence. Though his conversation be replete with the most sordid and selfish maxims, his heart is dilated with the most unbounded love. Okay, so he says, the speaker might be the author himself or just a speaker. He says, or the narrator you would call, he says that I have many acquaintances. Means an acquaintance is a person you know. You're not very close to to an acquaintance. Somebody you meet on the bus every day, somebody you meet when you go for a walk every evening. That is an acquaintance. You just look at them, nod at them, smile at them, exchange a word or two, that's all. He says that I am fond of many acquaintances, but I don't like to get too intimate with many people. But this man in black is one man I have a lot of respect for him, and I've often desired to become close to this particular person. And he says that this man is kind of a strange man. He's tinctured, he's touched with certain strange inconsistencies. This reminds us of Oliver Goldsmith himself, who was a mix of all sorts of strange tendencies. That's why people believe that man in black is Oliver Goldsmith himself. And then he says, though he is very generous to a profusion. Who is a generous person? Somebody who is willing to give, share his wealth or his time or whatever with others. That person is called generous. And this is the opposite of frugal or stingy, miserly. So this man is actually a very generous man. But then he talks of himself as being a very parsimonious person or a frugal person. He says that he is the stingiest person on earth and that he will not part with his money and all those things. But the truth is that he is very, very large-hearted. And he also always talks about his conversation is replete. Now, parsimony, the word means frugality or stinginess. And he says that though when he talks, his conversation is replete. Replete means full of, with most sordid and selfish maxims. He kind of always uses very sordid and selfish maxims, and he says that we should not help others, we should not help these people, we should not give money to others. He says all that, but then his heart is dilated with the most unbounded love. I have known him profess himself a man-hater, while his cheek was glowing with compassion, and while his looks were softened into pity, I've heard him use the language of the most unbounded ill nature. So he is a kind of, as I told you, a combination of contradictions. So he keeps saying that he is a man-hater. At the same time, there is so much of compassion in his face. He uses such unbounded, ill-natured words, but then his face often has the expression of pity. Some affect humanity and tenderness. Others boast of having such dispositions from nature. But he is the only man I ever knew who seemed ashamed of his natural benevolence. So that is true, isn't it? Often some people talk of themselves. They say that they are broad-minded, that I am a very large-hearted person, I feel pity for everybody, I am very helpful. But in truth, they may not be any of these things. They might be very stingy, very cruel, but they like to say that they are somebody good. He says this is the only man I have ever met who tries to conceal his natural benevolence. He is kind of ashamed at being a good man. God knows why. He takes as much pains to hide his feelings as any hypocrite would to conceal his indifference. But on every unguarded moment, the mask drops off and reveals him to the most superficial observer. So this man, though he is good inside, he tries to pretend that he is a very bad person. Usually it is hypocrites. Hypocrites, you know, a hypocrite is a person who is very false, who pretends to be something he is not. So hypocrites often I have seen struggling to conceal their indifference for mankind, conceal their unkindness, their rudeness. But I have never seen a man who always tries to hide his innate goodness. And he says that, but time to time, his mask of being rude, it falls off, and even a superficial observer, a casual bystander, can very well understand that this man is truly a very good person. And then in the next next few paragraphs, he talks about how one day the narrator happened to spend some time with this man in black, and they went into the country, one of our excursions into the country. Maybe they were just traveling together or walking one evening together, and the man in black was talking with great animation. He was talking about the provisions made for the poor in England. And he was saying that why should the poor be given so much of help? Why should the government do so much for the poor? This is more than what they really deserve, and all that. Okay, in one of our late excursions into the country, happening to discourse upon the provision, discourse means to discuss or speak, upon the provisions that was made for the poor in England, he seemed amazed at how any of his countrymen could be so foolishly weak as to relieve occasional objects of charity when the laws had made such ample provision for their support. In every parish house, says he, the poor are supplied with food, clothes, fire, and a bed to lie on. They want no more. I desire no more myself, yet still they seem discontented. I am surprised at the inactivity of our magistrates in not taking up such vagrants who are only a weight upon the industrious. I am surprised that the people are found to relieve them when they must be at the same time sensible that it in some measure encourages idleness, extravagance, and imposture. Were I to advise any man for whom I had the least regard, I would caution him by all means not to be imposed upon by their false pretenses. Let me assure you, sir, they are impostors, every one of them, and rather merit a prison than relief. So you can see a long tirade against the poor people. He says, I wonder why people are so generous. He was talking against people who are very charitable. And he says, see, the poor people are given all kind of support. In any parish house, a parish house is in every parish you have a church and you have a parish priest, and there is also a parish house there where a lot of charitable work is done. And so poor people who have nobody to look after them, who have no job, no money, they can always find food, clothes, fire, and a bed there. And so he says, this provision is made all over England. You go to any village, there you will find a parish house which helps the poor. Then why do these poor want more? He says, I don't want anything. I just want food. I just want some fire to keep myself warm, and I want a bed to sleep in. This is all I require in life. Isn't that enough for a human being to live a contented life? Then what more do these people need? And they keep on begging for more. And he says that I would in fact, if you encourage these beggars who come to you asking for help, you are actually encouraging idleness, extravagance, and imposture. Imposture is deception. Because that even we think, isn't it? Sometimes when you find people begging on the streets, you wonder in your mind, why can't these people go and do something? They seem to be healthy. Why can't they go and work? Can't they live a decent life? Why should they spend time begging and disturbing other people? And sometimes we say that when you see children begging, we say that we should not give them any money because it encourages them. It shows them that it is easier to live like this without working hard. We say all sorts of things about these people, isn't it? So that's exactly what he is doing too. And he says that if you encourage such people, they will become lazy and they will even resort to imposture, means fraudulence, because they will find it very easy to cheat people and get money, because this is an easy way to get money. And then he says, if I am really concerned about a person, I will advise him not to fall for all these false pretenses, because all of them, every one of them are imposters. Imposter is a fraud. Okay, and they're all pretending to be poor people. Now we know about all these beggar mafias in our country. There are so many movies about them, about how children are taken away from their homes and maimed, and how there is actually a big mafia behind these beggars who force these people to beg and take away money from them. In our country, we hear all these things. So there too, he says there are imposters, all frauds, who are kind of cheating us, and actually we should put them in prison instead of giving them relief. So he was saying all this when suddenly something happened. Okay, he was proceeding in this train earnestly to dissuade me. Dissuade is the opposite of persuade. Earnestly to dissuade me from an imprudence of which I am seldom guilty, when an old man who still had about him the remnants of tattered finery implored our compassion. So he was going on telling this, ranting and railing about this to the narrator. And the narrator says that I don't generally give any money to the beggars, because I am a little loath to part with my money. But this man was going on advising me, you should never do this, you should never give money to the beggars. While he was saying this, an old man came there and he implored our compassion. He asked for help, and he was wearing some clothes which showed that once upon a time he must have lived a comfortable life. That's why remnants of tattered finery. Maybe he was wearing a costly coat, but which was now all torn and tattered. So it showed that this man had seen a better life. But now, due to some misfortune, he has become poor. And he came and he said that I am not a common beggar, but I have been forced into the shameful profession because I have a dying wife. I'm just paraphrasing what I'm reading, okay? And I have 5 hungry children, so please help me. And so, being prepossessed against such falsehood, his story had not the least influence upon me. So the narrator says that I was not at all touched or moved by this story, because I have kind of sealed my heart already against such stories, so I didn't feel any pity for him. But I could see it visibly operate upon, but it was quite otherwise with the man in black. I could see it visibly operate upon his countenance and ineffectually interrupt his harangue. So harangue is a long tirade, scolding non-stop. So you remember he was scolding and he was advising this narrator not to help beggars. But now, on listening to this poor old man, the man in black was visibly touched. You could see the change on his countenance. Countenance is face. And he couldn't talk. He forgot what he was saying. He just stood there staring at this man. I could easily perceive that his heart burned to relieve the 5 starving children, but he seemed ashamed to discover his weakness to me. So it was very obvious. The narrator understood that this man was feeling very, very compassionate, and that he really, really wanted to help this poor man and his 5 starving children. But then he was ashamed, because how could he give money to this man in front of the narrator? Because just now he told the narrator that all these people were frauds. And so he was kind of hesitant. And while he thus hesitated between compassion and pride, I pretended to look another way, and he seized this opportunity of giving the poor petitioner a piece of silver, bidding him at the same time, in order that I should hear, go work for his bread and not tease passengers with such impertinent falsehood for the future. So, understanding the dilemma that the man in black was in, what did the narrator do? He just turned, as if he was looking somewhere, he just turned that side. And immediately the man in black quickly put his hand into his pocket and took out some money and gave it to his old man, very quickly, so that this man won't notice. And then, to make him hear it, loudly he scolded the old man, and he said, why do you want to cheat people with all your stories, false stories? Why don't you go and work for his bread? So saying all that, he moved on. But he was happy because he had given the money, and the narrator just let him enjoy the moment. He pretended as if he didn't see what happened. As he had fancied himself quite unperceived, he continued, as we proceeded, to rail against beggars with as much animosity as before. He threw in some episodes on his own amazing prudence and economy, with his profound skill in discovering imposters. He explained in the manner in which he would deal with beggars, were he a magistrate. hinted at enlarging some of the prisons for their reception, and told 2 stories of ladies that were robbed by beggarmen. So, thinking that this narrator had not seen him helping the other man, he continued to talk about beggars, how if he were the magistrate, he would somehow ban this begging, he would enlarge the prisons so that all these beggars could be put in the prison, and of how he was very good at finding an impostor. The moment he sees an impostor, he can detect an impostor. And he also said 2 stories about how some poor rich ladies were cheated, robbed by beggar men. So he was saying all this. After the 2 stories, he was going on to the 3rd story, when again there was an interruption. He was beginning a 3rd to the same purpose, when a sailor with a wooden leg once more crossed our walks, desiring our pity and blessing our limbs. I was for going on without taking any notice, but my friend, looking wishfully upon the poor petitioner, bid me stop, and he would shew me with how much ease he could at any time detect an impostor. So now came another beggar, and this man was a sailor with a wooden leg. So one leg was gone, and so he had a wooden leg, and he came hopping by. And then he said, he was blessing his limbs. Oh, you are so lucky to have both your limbs. Look at me, I just have one leg. My life is so difficult. He was going on. So now the narrator was in no mood to help this sailor with the wooden leg. And he suggested that we just walk on. Let's not bother about this man. But our man in black, the self-proclaimed man-hater, he couldn't move an inch. He said, wait, I'll show you. I'll prove that this man is an impostor. And they remained there. He now therefore assumed a look of importance, and in an angry tone began to examine the sailor, demanding in what engagement he was thus disabled and rendered unfit for service. So he put on the air of great seriousness, and he began to question. Examine here means to question or to interrogate the sailor, and he began to ask him, what happened to your leg? How did you lose your leg? What happened? And all those things in a very authoritative tone. And the sailor too replied in a tone as angrily as he, that he had been an officer on board a private ship of war, and he lost his leg abroad in defense for those who did nothing at home. At this reply, all my friend's importance vanished in a moment. He had not a single question more to ask. He now only studied what method he should take to relieve him unobserved. So the sailor was also angry, and he said, I was an officer on a private ship of war. I lost my leg for people like you who were sitting at home and doing nothing. I fought for my country, and that is how I lost my leg. On hearing this, our man in black had nothing to say. He was overwhelmed by pity and the desire to help this man, and he began to think of how he could help him without being observed by the narrator. He had, however, no easy part to act, as he was obliged to preserve the appearance of ill nature before me, and yet to relieve himself by relieving the sailor. Casting therefore a furious look upon some bundles of chips which the fellow carried in a string at his back, my friend demanded how he sold his matches, but not waiting for a reply, desired in a surly tone to have a shilling's worth. The sailor seemed first surprised at the demand, but soon recollected himself, and presenting his whole bundle, here master, says he, take all my cargo and a blessing into the bargain. So he wanted to help him, but at the same time he did not want to look like a very helpful person. So in a very rude manner, that is when he noticed that this sailor had a lot of matches. He had a string of matches which he was selling. So in order to help him, in a very rude manner, he asked him, what is the cost of your matches? And then he did not wait for a reply. He just gave him a shilling. A shilling is, the currency in England those days. He gave a shilling, and he said, take this and give me matches in return. And the sailor was kind of shocked first, and then what he did was, because a shilling was quite a good amount, he gave all his matches to our man in black and said, here master, take all my cargo. Cargo, why does he use the word cargo? Because he is basically a sailor. And he gives all the matches to this man in return for the money, and he tells him, and also take my blessing. I also give you my blessing, because you have done an immense help to me. That is what he implies. Now, it is impossible to describe with what an air of triumph my friend marched off with his new purchase. He assured me that he was firmly of opinion that those fellows must have stolen their goods, who could thus afford to sell them for half value. So he was very happy, but then he kept on complaining to this narrator, and he said that I'm sure this fellow stole all these matches from somewhere, because how can he sell it at half price, because these matches are worth more than a shilling, and look at him, he gave it to me for a shilling. That means he must have stolen it from somewhere. These are all frauds. He informed me of several uses to which those chips might be applied. He expatiated largely upon the saving that would result from lighting candles with a match instead of thrusting them into the fire. And then now he started justifying his purchase, because the other man would be wondering, why on earth would somebody buy so many matches? So then this man started explaining. Expatiated means to describe and explain elaborately. He began to say, I can save a lot of money with these matches, because when I light a candle, if you put the whole candle into the fire to light it, a lot of candle wax just drips away. But instead, if I light the candle with a match, a lot of wax can be saved. So I can save a lot of money by using a match to light my candle. So he was just finding excuses to justify his action. He averred that he would as soon have parted with a tooth as his money to those vagabonds, unless for some valuable consideration. I cannot tell how long this panegyric upon frugality and matches might have continued, had not his attention been called off by another object more distressful than either of the former. So he went on continuing this panegyric. Now what is a panegyric? It's a lofty oration, it's a big speech. So again, he continued his speech on these beggars and all these things, and suddenly a third beggar appeared, and this time it was a woman in rags, with one child in her arms, another on her back. So she had one baby in her arms, another baby tied onto her back maybe, and she was attempting to sing ballads, but with such a mournful voice that it was difficult to determine whether she was singing or crying. A wretch who in the deepest distress still aimed at good humour was an object my friend was by no means capable of withstanding. His vivacity and his discourse were instantly interrupted. Upon this occasion, his very dissimulation had forsaken him. Even in my presence, he immediately applied his hands to his pockets in order to relieve her. But guess his confusion when he found he had already given away all the money he carried about him to former objects. The misery painted in the woman's visage was not half so strongly expressed as the agony in his. So now what happened? This woman came, she was dressed in tatters, she had 2 babies with her, and she was trying to sing a ballad. You must have met such people on the train. On the train you have beggars who sing, and sometimes the song would be kind of so out of tune. They would have a very unpleasant voice and not at all fit for a singer. They would be singing in all wrong tunes. They would blare out, and it would be very difficult for you to listen to the song. But even then, you feel that at least this person is trying to do something. He is not just begging simply. He is trying to entertain the passengers by singing. So you don't hesitate to give him some money, because he is putting in some effort. Same way here, this woman was singing a ballad, but in such a mournful voice that it was difficult to find out whether she was crying or singing. And so this man, the man in black, was so touched by her gesture of trying to sing even when she was in such a miserable condition, and he immediately wanted to help her. He stopped his panegyric, he stopped talking, and he forgot that this narrator was with him. Immediately he put in both hands into his pockets to take some money and give it to this woman. But imagine his misery when he found that he had no money, because all the money he had, usually when you go for a walk, you don't carry all the money that you have. You just keep some money for some urgent purpose. So he had given some money to the old man that they met first. The remaining money he had given to the sailor with the wooden leg. And now imagine his consternation when he found that he had no money to help this poor woman with. He continued to search for some time, And it says here, the misery painted in the woman's visage was not half so strong as expressed as the agony on his. So this woman, visage means face. So there was so much of misery on this woman's face, but at that moment there was greater agony painted in this man's face because he couldn't help her. So what he did was, he tried searching in all his pockets, the pant pocket and the coat pockets and everywhere, and he continued to search for some time, but to no purpose, till at length, recollecting himself, with a face of ineffable good nature, as he had no money, he put into her hands his shilling's worth of matches. So he searched all his pockets, he found no money, and then with a look of ineffable good nature, ineffable is something that cannot be described in words, inexpressible. There was so much of love and compassion in his face. With that expression, suddenly he thought of the matches that he had. You remember, he had bought some matches, a shilling worth of matches from the sailor. He thrust all these matches into the woman's hands because he did not have any money. So this is what he tells about the man in black, and so you can see what a lovable character this man is. He tries to pretend that he is a bad man, but his heart is so full of goodness. It's overflowing with compassion and love. And you can see the humor too, because you can see all the humor of Oliver Goldsmith in this essay. So that is how the essay comes to an end, where he says that this man, he so happily, with so much of compassion and love, he gave all the matches that he had bought to this woman, hoping that she can get some money by maybe selling these matches. Okay, so that is the essay on Man in Black. Isn't it a wonderful and a cute kind of an essay? And don't you really like this character? Such a lovable, such an affable character this man is. And so this Man in Black is one very popular character. And again, you can see the felicity of language, the prose style of Oliver Goldsmith. You can see his scholarliness in the words that he uses. He uses a lot of high sounding and bombastic words, but at the same time there is such felicity of diction that it just takes you along with it. He uses long sentences, but then it is so racy. There is no kind of lag anywhere. It just takes you at great speed. All the passion that this man feels, that is the Man of Black tries to express through his words, you can see that in this essay. You can feel it as you read it. Now this is one small example of to show how Oliver Goldsmith was a master in his craft. And this essay is one example that lives to showcase the talents of the writer named Oliver Goldsmith.